Hello everybody and welcome back to the next part of this series. As announced last time, today we're gonna start with modeling a little bit, or to get familiar with some modeling software that I use. Although I promised you whatever I will show you in modeling techniques will also be applicable to 3ds Max or any other type, Blender, Maya, whatever you use. However, I will use Modo. That's the software package I'm now using. Although that wasn't always the case before that. I have extensive experience with 3D Studio Max, and the reasons why I switched over to Modo, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about and how to approach working with Modo. But just a little disclaimer up front. I'm not working for the Foundry or Luxology. I'm not affiliated with Modo or any other software that comes from them in any way. So anything you will hear me say about Modo is my own true opinion, and so I'm not getting paid to tell you anything about it. First I show you what Modo is, what the company is that makes Modo. If I pull up the web page, it's www.foundry.com. Modo comes from the Foundry. They also do these other projects like Mari, which just got released in a brand new version. And on top, if we go to products, we see their lineup with all different kinds of applications for color grading, for collaborative storytelling, and so on. And if we select Modo, then we see the new version here available for a free trial. So if you want, you can download this and have a 30-day free trial on the full version. The retail price of the commercial version, I think, is about 1,700 euros. That is a lot, but there are fortunately alternatives. Yeah, here we have it, 17.99 for a perpetual license, which sounds like much, which is much. And if you're on a budget and cannot afford that much money for a software package, then you have an alternative on Steam. There you can get the version 10, so that's one version behind the recent one, for 279.99 euros. If you live outside the Eurozone, obviously you have to convert it into your own currency. But yeah, it gives you the same as for the big price for the recent version, the perpetual license. You can even buy it together with Mari 3 in a package for 353. You could even get a subscription, for example, for 6 months for 10 euros roughly a month, and try it out that way. And yes, even 279.99 might seem a lot of money, but if you compare that to the price range of an Autodesk license, it's actually quite a bargain. Having said that, let's start up the software. And when you open Modo for the first time, it will look probably something like this. And there are a lot of things that you might want to change at the very beginning to make your experience with Modo a little bit easier, especially when you're coming from Max or Maya. The first thing you will notice is that on top of our normal grid that we also have in Max, we have this additional grid here in our space, and that is the work plane. Modo has a free configurable additional axis plane that you can place at any angle anywhere in the world, align to any object that you want, and use it to construct or align other objects to it. For now, we're gonna hide it, because in the beginning it's more confusing than it actually helps, and you only need it in very few situations. And I usually don't like my grid to be displayed. And the next thing you might want to change, otherwise you will have a hard time navigating around in this. The rotation of objects now will feel a bit weird because we are in trackball mode. Somehow that's enabled by default. So we go into our system preferences, and under the OpenGL node in our settings, we disable the trackball rotation and override that, so we don't have to change it for all the viewports individually. And now Modo will behave pretty much as we expected from Max. Here with this little arrow we can change in our view with our perspective viewport and the 3 orthogonal viewports. The navigation itself in Modo is pretty easy, and when you place your left hand on the keyboard at the position where you normally put it when you're playing a WASD shooter game or something like that, you will actually never have to move your wrist away from that position much, except for the occasional push on the P key or the open square bracket. So Modo makes it very comfortable working on an ergonomic level. Here in the corner I put in a little marker that will show the mouse button and keystrokes that I push, so you can also follow along on that level, because Modo makes use of a lot of key shortcuts, so you will be never actually visiting those menus up here very much. Most of the things are handled by keyboard presses, and as I said, they're all located on the left side of your keyboard, so your hand can there rest very easily. So that's for the beginning. Now the general idea behind Modo, and I found out that this was the hardest thing to get when coming over from Max, is the principal approach. In 3ds Max you have your graphite modeling tools where you can make bevels, extrude, etc., and you have your modifier stack, but that modifier stack makes you basically just the end customer of some functionality. It has some parameters, and if that's what you need, then you're lucky. And if that modifier does not something quite the way you want, yeah, then tough luck. Here in Modo, all tools, everything that we can do with meshes, all the cloning and all the deforming, the bending, vortices and swirls, all of that is basically set up from primary operations. And they include simple things like the transforms, so moving, rotating, scaling, and they are then combined with other things like fall-offs. So if I would create a tool that has a radial fall-off and combine it with a rotate transform, then I would basically have this vortex or swirl, because it's a rotation that gradually attenuates with the distance from the center, so it makes the whole thing go in a swirl pattern. And that makes Modo very flexible. All the tools you can additionally create to the ones that are in here, you can give them an own icon, you can add your own tab groups here, basically create your own tool set of modeling tools. We won't get into that on the very first episode, obviously, but that's something that Modo really helps helps you to design your own workspace. Another thing that makes Modo especially useful when it comes for modeling with Unreal Engine is the fact that there is for once a live bridge. So right on our main Modo page we see our very familiar looking Unreal Engine logo. Here we could set up a server connection to our Unreal Engine. On the marketplace there's a free plugin for the Modo bridge, so you can just add that to your engine and then you will have the Modo bridge. And it's a real live bridge, so when I move meshes around here in my scene that I have in Modo and then get that over to push that over to the bridge, then it's instantly updated on the engine, and vice versa. I move stuff in the engine, and in the engine plugin menu, if I select push over to Modo, then it will update the Modo scene here as well, and it's updating the meshes and also textures and materials. When we set them up here, they also go in directly into the appropriate assets. And for the materials, we can actually create Unreal specific shaders right here. So that would create an Unreal specific material that would could be directly imported into the engine then. Let's switch just back to our modeling tab. Those tabs here, by the way, they are just different layouts, and it's fully configurable, so I could add new layouts and combine all of these windows the way I want. And it's really useful because Modo has many more features than would fit on a single layout page. So let's quickly go through them. Modeling is obviously where we do our geometry manipulations with. Topology, if we had objects in the scene, we could re-topologize them, changing the edge flow of meshes and so forth. UV edit, there we also have a UV port, and for example this right side here is not different than my modeling perspective view. So if I'm in the UV edit layout tab and I'm making my UV layout and I want to make changes on the geometry side of things, I could do this just in this viewport as I would do it over here, so I don't have to switch tabs. And the next tab is for sculpting and for painting. Modo has also provisions to do that. Later I can show you an example of what sculpting would look like in Modo. On the layout tab, I have here on the bottom my asset browser, and here you do the layup for your scene in terms of camera placement and supplying background surroundings for those scenes. And on the setup, it's kind of similar, but here you can drive things with procedural values. So it's a bit tailored to animation, although animation has its own tab. And I really like what's in here. That's also something where Modo really caters to the gaming industry and people using Modo in combination with the game engine. There's a dedicated tool set of game tools for baking out normal maps, for creating vertex maps and all kinds of morphing tools. And yeah, with the whole baking facility, we can bake all kinds of render outputs or texture outputs that we have on our model. And the animate tab. Oh, one thing about the game tools though is that we have our still renderer here. Obviously now it's displaying just black, but we could also enter a preview mode and use a game navigations tab, but we don't have a perspective camera view at the moment in our scene. Let me just see if that works. No, it doesn't accept the default camera. We would have to set this up, but then we could directly use our viewport here for a play in editor session. So that's something we could set up here as well. We can have then a visual representation of what our level would look like if seen through the camera. Later when we have something actually that we can use, then we're gonna come back to that. The animation tab, pretty self-explanatory, keyframe based animations. You can set up all kind of parameters in here and drive your animations with that. So yeah, it's pretty much like the sequencer in Unreal Engine, I guess. The render tab we shortly visited already. Again, here this viewport is the same as my normal 3D viewport. I could make changes to geometry, move it around wherever I want. The shader tree of Modo pretty much works like the layers in Photoshop. So all material layers would be lined up here underneath, and when you assign a material to geometry, it's basically just acting as a sort of selection mask for that. So it's very powerful yet easy to layer up your materials. The render itself has also a lot of functions, much more and more detailed than what you could select for your renderings in 3D Studio. And yeah, quite performant as well. There is a scripting tab where you can use Python to script procedural things in your scene or for your scene, although we are not gonna use that. And lastly, there is something that's called schematic fusion, and it means we could make procedural booleans, non-destructive booleans, that snap together like in a node system, like you are familiar with it from Blueprints or the Unreal Material Editor. We probably will touch on that very late in our Modo sessions, because we will only use it then for very detailed organic high-res objects. But just to give you an impression of what it's called Mesh Fusion, what it can do, here's a short clip from the Foundry that showcases it. Although it's based on an earlier version of Modo, it's still valid and can be used the same way today. Just the current version has much more improved on precision and speed. So there you have it. That's the overview of what Modo has in terms of functionality. And let's start modeling a little bit and get familiar with the controls. The way Modo organizes its meshes is in layers. So we have here now a mesh object layer, and we can fill it with geometry. Say we go to our polygon mode, we select a new polygon from our tool, primitive tools here, and we have here some values that we can enter, but we can also like click just in our viewport and pull out this this cube. And here comes a big difference in terms of 3ds Max. If I would now click anywhere here in this viewport, it would just grab the nearest tool handle and locates its position to the mouse cursor. So that tool is still active, so we're not having actually created our cube. In order to do that, we press the space bar, and the space bar is the most important key in Modo. You will use the space bar all the time. What the space bar does is that it drops the tool. So let's just do that again. I activate my tool. Here I have my tool parameters. I draw in my cube. Can move it around, I can do whatever I want, but unless I have not pressed the spacebar, nothing is really finite. And now, after pressing spacebar, that cube exists now in the world. I can center it if I want to along various axes, and now we have that geometry in the world. The vertices, of course, we can access. That's if we go to the vertices selection, because we can also press 1 on the keyboard and it will go to that. Similar, if we press a 2, we get to the edge selection mode. 3 is polygons. If we hit 4, we could select geometry based on the material that we assign to that geometry. And 5 gives us the item mode, and the item mode is basically, yeah, you could think of it as the root component for that for this whole object. So when I'm in polygon mode and say I want to move my polygons, I hit W, then this pivot here is basically only the pivot for this polygon selection, and currently all polygons are selected. That is the rule of Modo. If I select only one polygon, then only that one polygon is selected. If I select all of them, string Shift Alt A, then all 6 polygons are selected. But if I don't select any polygon, then that also means all polygons are selected. So whenever you want to do a mesh operation on all the polygons or all the vertices, all the edges, then you don't have to select them all, just select none of them and then perform your operation on that. So if I go to my item mode and if I would move here, that is the real pivot of my object. And if I move the polygons around, let's say like this, spacebar, drop the tool, and I go to my item mode and I move my items, my object pivot still stays here at the bottom. So that makes this pivot independent of whatever we have for our polygon selection. We can, of course, when we want to move that pivot around in the world, set it to a place where we want it. Same with rotation. For the E key, I can put it at this position and then rotate around that. Spacebar to drop the tool. Let's center that up again. So now let's suppose we want to edit this geometry. We want to make a little bevel here. Then we hit the B key. B is just for bevel. And now I'm in the polygon mode. So that activates the bevel tool for my polygons. And now it would bevel basically all the polygons because I have not selected specific ones. So if I drag out my bevel, it would bevel all of the polygons. Here in my tool options, I have the option to group them. So basically it would create again just connected polygons there. Let's take that back. So now I'm selecting just the top layer, hit my bevel tool, then I click in the viewport to activate the tool, and then I can bevel around on that surface. There is no specific extrude tool like there is in Max, where you have a different tool for beveling and extruding. Here an extrude is basically just bevel with a 0 inset. So if it's neither positive or negative inset, then that equals to an extrude. Of course we can add our values here manually if we want to. There are standard units that you can set these value fields to. So for example, now I hit 500, hit the tab key, and it snaps to 500 meters. But we can also change that to be millimeters, centimeters, whatever we want. Let's say we bevel this out and a little bit in, and we want to continue beveling, then we could drop the tool, press B again, click in our viewport to activate the tool again, and then continue beveling. But what we could do instead, let me just delete these surfaces. I select the edges with the 2, double click on that, it will select the entire edge loop, and now we hit the P key for polygon, and it will automatically closes that off. And that will work for any selection that defines an unambiguous polygon. So instead of selecting those 4 edges, I could have also selected those 4 vertices and hit P. That would also give me a polygon. And yeah. The other thing about selections is that I can convert them into each other. So I have a polygon selected, and I want the edges that make up this polygon. Edges are the number 2 key, and I press it in combination with the Alt key. So Alt 2 would turn that into the edges, and Alt 1 would turn it into vertices. Alt 3 would give me the polygon again. So if I select only 3 vertices and hit Alt 3, it would do nothing because those 3 vertices, they do not define this polygon. It has 4 vertices. So that's how you select things, and the hotkeys for each tool are always the same. So with the B key, I bevel here my polygons, but when I'm in edge mode, let's say I have this edge here selected, and I hit the B key, then I would basically bevel that edge. I can select a roundness factor here for it, and yeah, I'm basically beveling that edge instead of a polygon. I can even bevel a single vertex. Again, the B key, and if I pull that out, then I'm starting to create a beveled vertex. If I take then these 3 faces here and bevel them slightly inward, I get rid of those normal issues. Again, drop the tool, always. And then I would have created a beveled corner on my cube. Navigation in the viewport is also pretty simple. All you have to do is hold the Alt key pressed, and then you turn. And if in addition you also hold the Shift key pressed, then you pan. So I usually tend to stay with my thumb on the Alt button, and then I can rotate, and then I additionally use my ring finger for the Shift key and pan around. The same here in our viewports. If I just click, nothing really happens, but Alt and dragging around, that will move my viewport. Of course, there is no rotation here in these viewports, so the Shift key in addition will do nothing. Alright, let's delete this mesh. We can delete meshes by just clicking here on the X symbol. That deletes it. Just warns me that it's the only one in the scene, and if I really want to delete it, I say yes. And in order to get a new mesh layer, an empty mesh layer, I just hit the N key, and here I have my mesh layer again. I can create as many as I want and also combine them then individually. In addition to that, you can have multiple scenes open and reference meshes between them. So if you go for a collaborative work style, then all your artists can work on their individual scenes, and you can combine it into a master scene. And if you push that over to the bridge into the Unreal Engine, into your level, then you have real geometry collaboration on the level that you are working with. So that is basically the conclusion of this episode. There's only one thing I like to show you in case you are getting interested in my Modo and want to check out some other tutorials by other people. Here is one I can really recommend. This is a real gold mine from a Swiss guy called Peter Stambach, and he made over the past 5 years a bazillion of tutorials on how to model things with Modo. He has a very interesting modeling style, building it basically from a cross-section ground up. He calls it 2D to 3D modeling. It's not the same way I tend to model my assets, but it's interesting nevertheless, and you might give it a look, although of course those versions that are 5 years old, they may use processes that are even more simple now, but 99% of what he does is still applicable for the current versions of Modo. So here he also shows how to do custom collisions for the Unreal Engine, and and also how to export the rounded edge shader. That's something that Modo has that is really nice. Maybe I can show that off real quick for a cube as the really final item of this episode. Okay, say we have a cube and we render our cube. Here we have it in our rendering window, and I want this cube to have somewhat rounded edges. I could modify the geometry, and so if I select all edges or none edges, it's the same. I hit my B key for bevel and start rounding my edges. See, it's the same geometry viewport. I can make all edits in here. I can even move objects around here in my rendering viewport. It's all the same, but instead of cranking up the poly count by creating those edges in geometry, I can basically just go to my material and set my rounded edge width to let's say 15 millimeters. Let's see what that does. Of course not 15 meters, 15 millimeters, and we can see that we have a rounded edge on our object. It's basically done only with normal map manipulation. We don't spend any polygons on this, and as Peter Stambach shows in his videos, and also I will show you, because the baking process is a little bit different in current Modo versions, you can of course bake that out, so you will not use that much poly count just to have a rounded edge on one of your objects. But that's then for another time. I hope you got somewhat interested in this application. Have a look at it. I think it's really worth it. Until the next time, have fun with Modo and the engine. Bye.